Katerina's looking for some clarity around the importance of hypotheses, and they asked the following question. Do I need hypotheses in mixed methods research? And also, what about qualitative research? So, Matthew, first off, what is a hypothesis? When is it relevant? And do we need to include it in every dissertation as well?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is our sort of educated guess on what we think is going to happen. Okay, that's sort of the broad colloquial answer of what is a hypothesis, what we think is going to happen. They're really important in experimental research. So, anytime, particularly quantitative research, where we are collecting data, we are doing some statistical analysis, we're running an experiment, those are the times we really want to include those hypotheses. And that's important because remember, all of our statistics seek to reject a null hypothesis. And so you state a hypothesis that says, this is what we think is going to happen. There's a statistically significant relationship between this thing and this thing, for example. And then we reject that null hypothesis through our statistical processes. So in an experimental study, you must have hypotheses because otherwise you don't have anything to interpret on the back end. If you're doing mixed methods, then you do have a quantitative experimental element. And so you will need hypotheses for that element because, again, without them, you have nothing to discuss, to explore, to examine. Now, on the qualitative side of things, qualitative research is a little different because it's more about understanding the current state of a phenomena. Right? So you might have some preconceived ideas about that, but really in qualitative work, we want to work to eliminate and control our preconceived ideas before we go into those conversations, before we do our interviews, before we do our coding. So in those spaces, applying a hypothesis early is really a bad thing because it becomes bias that you have to check for. And that's why we do things like third-party member checks. That's why we do reflective journaling so that we can document and trace our own biases that we're bringing to the table. So in a mixed method study, it's a little tricky because you are going to have a hypothesis for some parts of your problem, but then you're going to have this qualitative element that you really need to approach with a broad, open mind. And it's just important that you realize that you're using two methods and that when I'm in method A, I'm quantitative, that I have this mindset, I'm looking at this hypothesis, but then I've got this whole other world over here. And when I switch over there, I leave that part behind.
Nice. I think that's really helpful, especially the splitting between quantitative and qualitative. Now, again, these are all generalizations. Certain universities do have expectations, and I will be honest and say there are some universities that ask you to do things that are not academically appropriate, but nonetheless, that's a requirement for your degree. So do make sure to check your guidance documents, check with your supervisor or thesis advisor, or even more importantly, look at previous examples of dissertations from your department, from your supervisor as well, because that's going to give you an idea of what the expectations are. The best bit of advice I can offer is always check your supervisor or chair's previous student papers. That's going to give you an idea of what their expectations are, what their style is, and also it's going to help you notice any of those weird things like a hypothesis for a qualitative section. So do keep that in mind as well.